High above Beverly Hills, hidden behind stone walls and carefully manicured grounds, stands one of the most impressive private residences ever built in America. Greystone Estate. Massive limestone walls. Commanding views over Los Angeles. A structure designed to last centuries and announce the permanence of one of America's wealthiest oil families. But here's what makes Greystone different from every other grand mansion in California. Almost no one ever truly lived inside it. The house was completed in 1928. Fully furnished. Perfectly prepared. Ready to become the generational home of a powerful dynasty. And then, almost immediately, something went catastrophically wrong. The family it was built for never had the chance to settle in. Never hosted the gatherings the grand halls were designed for. Never accumulated the decades of memories that transform architecture into a home. This is not a story about a mansion that decayed over time. This is about a house whose purpose collapsed the moment it was finished. Visitors today, tourists, film crews, wedding guests, all describe the same unsettling feeling. Beauty without warmth. Scale without comfort. Silence that has nothing to do with age. A sense that something ended here before it ever truly began. The rooms are preserved perfectly. The gardens remain immaculate. Sunlight pours through massive windows. But the atmosphere never softened. Even now, nearly a century later, Greystone feels emotionally frozen. Trapped in the exact moment when everything the mansion was built to represent simply stopped. Tonight, we reveal the dark secret of Greystone Estate. Not a mystery hidden in its later history, but a truth locked into the very moment this fortress was completed. This is the story of how one of America's grandest mansions became a monument not to success, but to interruption. To understand what happened at Greystone, you first need to understand the era that created it. The 1920s in America were defined by a specific kind of power, industrial wealth on a scale the country had never seen before. Oil fortunes, railroad empires, manufacturing dynasties. Money wasn't just accumulated. It was displayed, monumentalized, turned into stone and steel to prove that the family who built their fortune would last forever. Mansions weren't homes in the traditional sense. They were declarations. Physical proof that your family had arrived. That your wealth was real, substantial, permanent. And nowhere was this philosophy more perfectly expressed than in Greystone Estate. The man who commissioned it was Edward Doheny, one of America's wealthiest oil tycoons, a man whose fortune was built on drilling, speculation, and the explosive growth of California's oil industry. Doheny understood something fundamental about power in his era. It had to be seen to be believed. So he built Greystone for his son, Ned Doheny, as a gift that would establish the younger generation's place among American aristocracy. The location was chosen with precision. High above Beverly Hills, on 18 acres of hillside property that overlooked the city below. Not integrated into the community but presiding over it from above. A vantage point that was both literal and symbolic. The Doheny family looking down on Los Angeles, their wealth lifting them above everyone else. The design reflected this psychology perfectly. Greystone was built with imported Indiana limestone, 46,000 square feet of fortress-like architecture that looked more like a European castle than a California residence. The walls were thick, imposing, designed to last not decades but centuries. Inside, the layout prioritized grandeur over intimacy. Massive entrance halls with soaring ceilings, spaces designed to make visitors feel small, to establish immediate hierarchy between the family who owned this and anyone who entered it. Grand staircases that were theatrical rather than functional. You didn't just walk up these stairs, you ascended them, performing your place in the social order. Reception rooms that could accommodate dozens, even hundreds of guests. Because wealth at this scale wasn't private, it was performative. But notably, the private family spaces were surprisingly limited. The bedrooms were functional but not particularly warm. Personal sitting areas were minimal. The spaces where a family would actually live day to day were secondary to the spaces designed to impress. Because Greystone wasn't really built for living. It was built for demonstrating that the Doheny family had arrived and would remain. Every architectural choice reinforced this message. The stone announced permanence. Unlike wood that could burn or decay, limestone would stand for generations. The height announced dominance, rising above the landscape rather than settling into it. The scale announced success. Only families with extraordinary wealth could afford to build and maintain something this substantial. This was architecture as armor. In an era where fortunes could be made and lost rapidly, where public opinion was turning against industrial tycoons, where wealth was increasingly scrutinized, a mansion like Greystone said, "We are beyond question. We are established. We are here to stay." The house took years to complete with no expense spared. Imported materials. Master craftsmen. Design details that would require constant maintenance and substantial staff to preserve. It was meant to be the foundation of a dynasty. A place where Ned Doheny would raise his children, who would raise their children, creating generations of family history absorbed into these limestone walls. The mansion was completed in early 1928. Perfect. Finished. Ready. And that's when everything that Greystone was built to represent, permanence, continuity, generational success, collapsed completely. Because the family it was built for never had time to grow into it. Within months of the house's completion, tragedy struck in a way that would define Greystone forever. Not through decades of decline. Not through slow dissolution of the family's fortune. But through a single, catastrophic moment that transformed this monument to permanence into a memorial to interruption. The grand halls that were designed for generations of family gatherings would stand empty. The bedrooms prepared for children and grandchildren would remain essentially unused. The dining room built to host decades of celebrations would echo with silence. Greystone Estate was completed exactly as its builders intended. A perfect expression of wealth, power, and permanence. But the irony is almost unbearable. The mansion succeeded brilliantly at being exactly what it was designed to be. It just never got the chance to become what it was meant for. And that distinction, between architectural success and human purpose, would haunt Greystone for the next century. On February 16, 1929, less than a year after Greystone's completion, Ned Doheny and his secretary Hugh Plunkett were found dead inside the mansion. The official conclusion was murder-suicide. The investigation determined that Plunkett shot Ned Doheny before turning the gun on himself. The reasons cited were personal and financial, stress, mental health struggles, tensions that had been building between the two men. The case was closed relatively quickly. But from the beginning, questions lingered. The Doheny family was already embroiled in scandal. Edward Doheny, Ned's father, was involved in the Teapot Dome scandal, one of the most notorious political corruption cases of the 1920s. The family was under intense public scrutiny. Their wealth and influence were being questioned in courts and newspapers across the country. And now, in the middle of this very public scandal, the heir to the Doheny fortune was dead inside the mansion built to secure his family's legacy. Some questioned whether the official explanation was complete. Others suggested that the stress of the scandal, the pressure of living up to his father's empire, the weight of inhabiting a house designed to announce permanence, had simply become too much. We'll never know the full truth. What we know for certain is this: the tragedy transformed Greystone immediately and permanently. The house that was meant to be the foundation of generations became instead the site of devastating loss. Rooms that should have been filled with decades of family life were now marked by absence. The grand staircase that was designed for children and grandchildren to descend would never see that future. The halls meant for celebrations, for gatherings, for the slow accumulation of family history, stood silent. Ned's widow Lucy tried to remain at Greystone for a time. But how do you live in a house that was built to represent a future that will never arrive? How do you inhabit spaces designed for a family that will never grow? How do you make a home in a mansion that has become a memorial? She couldn't. Within a few years, Lucy left Greystone. The house that was supposed to be lived in for generations was abandoned by the family after barely being occupied at all. And this is where Greystone's story becomes truly unusual. Because the mansion wasn't allowed to decay. It wasn't left to slowly deteriorate the way many tragic estates have been. Instead, it was preserved, maintained, washed, kept in nearly perfect condition. The Doheny family couldn't inhabit it, but they also couldn't let it fall apart. Because allowing Greystone to decay would be admitting that the entire project had failed, that the monument to permanence had become a monument to loss. So the house remained frozen. Not through abandonment and neglect, but through preservation and silence. The room stayed empty but immaculate. The grounds remained perfectly manicured. Staff continued maintaining a house that no one lived in. It was as if Greystone was waiting, perpetually prepared for a family that would never return. And in that waiting, the mansion became something unique among American estates. Most historic homes accumulate layers of history. They're shaped by the decades and generations that inhabit them. They evolve, adapt, absorb the lives lived within their walls. Greystone didn't get that chance. It was defined entirely by its beginning, by the tragedy that occurred before the house could become anything else. The mansion was emotionally frozen at the moment of its completion. All that architectural confidence, all that limestone permanence, all those grand spaces designed for centuries of family life, stopped. And in stopping, Greystone revealed something that the families who built these monuments rarely wanted to acknowledge. That no amount of stone, money, or careful planning can guarantee a future. That permanence is an illusion that can shatter in a single moment. That the houses built to announce, "We will last forever," can become tombstones for futures that never arrived. Visitors who walk through Greystone today often comment on the same feeling. The house is beautiful but cold. Impressive but emotionally distant. Preserved but never healed. And that's because Greystone isn't really a historic home in the traditional sense. It's a snapshot. A moment captured and held in place for nearly a century. The moment when everything a mansion was built to represent simply ended. The darkest secret of Greystone Estate isn't hidden in its basement or sealed in its walls. It's embedded in the very reason the house exists at all. A monument to permanence that became a memorial to interruption. A dynasty that ended before it began. A future that was planned down to the inch but never arrived. And most haunting of all, a house that remains perfect, preserved, and utterly unchanged because it never got the chance to become what it was meant to be. A home. After Lucy Doheny left Greystone, the mansion entered a peculiar kind of existence. It wasn't abandoned, that would have been simpler in a way. Abandoned houses decay. They're reclaimed by time and weather. They become obviously empty. Greystone remained maintained. The Doheny family, despite their inability to inhabit it, couldn't quite let it go either. So the estate was kept up. Grounds manicured. Interiors preserved. Security maintained. But no one lived there. It was a house waiting, perpetually ready for an occupation that would never come. In 1965, the city of Beverly Hills purchased Greystone, and it officially became a public estate. On paper, this was a smooth transition, a private mansion becoming a cultural landmark, a piece of architectural history preserved for public appreciation. But emotionally, nothing changed. Because you can transfer ownership of a building. You can reclassify it from private residence to public park. But you can't erase what a place fundamentally is. And Greystone remained what it had always been, a monument frozen at the moment of its tragedy. As a public estate, Greystone began serving new purposes. Film crews discovered it quickly. The mansion's grand scale and dramatic architecture made it perfect for movies and television shows needing to convey wealth, power, or Gothic atmosphere. It has appeared in dozens of productions over the decades. The limestone walls have played the part of Wayne Manor in Batman, wealthy estates in countless period dramas, backdrop for music videos and photographs. The public could visit the grounds, walk the gardens, admire the architecture from outside. Events could be hosted, weddings on the lawn, corporate gatherings, cultural programs. Life appeared to return to Greystone in a sense. But never to the interior spaces the way a family would have inhabited them. The mansion remained fundamentally what the tragedy had made it, a stage set rather than a home. Beautiful to observe. Impressive to photograph. Perfect for temporary use. But never truly occupied again. And there's something revealing in how Greystone's darkest chapter is handled by those who manage it today. The tours are brief about the tragedy. Plaques mention it in carefully neutral language. Guides acknowledge it happened but don't dwell on details. The house is allowed to exist, to be admired, to serve various public functions. But not to speak about what defines it most. This silence is its own kind of preservation. Not just of the building but of the moment, keeping the tragedy contained, referenced but not examined, acknowledged but not processed. Walk through Greystone today and you'll feel this immediately. The ceilings still soar overhead, imposing rather than inspiring. The corridors still stretch long and cold, designed for scale not warmth. The rooms remain vast, beautiful but emotionally distant. Nothing about the architecture has changed because nothing about the building has been allowed to evolve beyond its original, interrupted purpose. Most historic homes develop a patina, not just of age but of accumulated human presence. You can feel generations of family life in their walls. The spaces have been softened by decades of daily living. The architecture has been humanized by the people who made it their own. Greystone has none of that. It remains exactly what it was in 1928, architecturally perfect, emotionally frozen. The preservation that was meant to honor it has instead trapped it in its darkest moment. There's a profound irony here. The Doheny family built Greystone to ensure their legacy would last. They chose limestone that would endure centuries. They created architecture that would resist time. And they succeeded. The mansion has lasted physically unchanged for nearly a century. But that permanence became a curse rather than a blessing. Because while the building remained perfect, the purpose behind it vanished. The legacy that was supposed to unfold across generations ended in a single morning, and the monument that was meant to celebrate continuity became instead a memorial to interruption. Preserved, maintained, admired, but never healed. Never allowed to become something new. Never released from the tragedy that defined it at the moment of its completion. Greystone stands today as one of America's most perfectly preserved estates, and one of its saddest, not because it fell into ruin, but because it remained exactly as it was when everything it represented simply stopped. A house that succeeded at being permanent, but failed at becoming a home. Over the decades since the tragedy, Greystone has accumulated something beyond its official history. Rumors, whispers, legends. People who visit describe feeling watched, sensing presences in empty rooms, experiencing inexplicable cold spots or hearing sounds that have no source. Ghost stories have attached themselves to Greystone the way they attach to any place marked by tragedy and preserved in silence. Some claim to have seen figures in the windows. Others report doors closing on their own. Security guards tell stories of unexplained phenomena during night shifts. These stories spread the way such stories always do. And they're compelling. There's something satisfying about explaining a house's unsettling atmosphere through supernatural presence rather than architectural psychology. But here's the truth. The real darkness of Greystone has nothing to do with ghosts. It lies in something far more mundane and far more disturbing. The tragedy was investigated, concluded, and moved past with remarkable efficiency. Official explanations were provided. The case was closed. The family's wealth and influence ensured that questions, if they existed, didn't linger in public discourse. And Greystone was allowed to continue existing, preserved but silenced. This is what makes the estate unsettling. Not that something terrible happened there, tragedy occurs in many places, but that the tragedy was so cleanly contained, so efficiently processed, so thoroughly prevented from disrupting the family's broader legacy or the mansion's continued existence as a cultural landmark. The house reveals something uncomfortable about how extreme wealth operates. That loss can be managed like any other problem. That tragedy can be preserved without being processed. That buildings can be maintained in perfect condition while the emotional truth they contain remains frozen. This connects to something broader about American culture and old money. We celebrate ambition. We admire success. We're comfortable with stories of triumph and achievement. But we struggle profoundly with unfinished legacies. With power that was interrupted rather than transferred. With dynasties that ended before they began. Greystone represents exactly that discomfort. It's a monument to everything America celebrates: wealth, ambition, architectural achievement, family legacy. That failed in the most fundamental way possible. And we don't quite know what to do with that. So the house continues existing. Beautiful. Accessible. Admired for its architecture. But the full weight of what it represents, the fragility beneath industrial power, the way tragedy can render success meaningless in a moment, remains largely unspoken. The paranormal rumors are, in some ways, easier to process than this truth. Ghosts can be dismissed or believed, but they're external. They're additions to the house's story. The real darkness is internal. Built into the limestone. Embedded in the soaring ceilings. Present in every perfectly preserved room. It's the darkness of a place that was completed exactly when its purpose ended. Of architecture that succeeded at being permanent but failed at being meaningful. Of a dynasty that was planned with precision but undone by human fragility. Look at Greystone and you see everything that industrial-era wealth believed about itself. That permanence could be engineered. That legacy could be guaranteed through proper planning and sufficient resources. That stone and scale could ensure a family's place in history. And in the same glance, you see the truth that wealth tries desperately to avoid. That none of it matters if life doesn't continue. That the most impressive mansion in America can be rendered meaningless by a single morning's tragedy. That permanence is always an illusion. The dark secret of Greystone Estate isn't hidden in rumors or sealed in its basement. It's standing in plain sight. A perfect house that never became a home. A monument to success that became a memorial to interruption. A building that has outlasted its own purpose by nearly a century. Preserved, admired, and utterly unable to move beyond the moment when everything it represented simply ended. Today, Greystone Estate remains one of the most photographed mansions in America. Its limestone walls still command the hillside above Beverly Hills. Its gardens remain impeccably maintained. Sunlight still pours through those massive windows. Visitors walk the grounds regularly. Film crews continue using it as shorthand for wealth and power. Weddings are hosted on its lawns. Corporate events occupy its spaces. Life, of a sort, continues at Greystone, but the house itself remains fundamentally unchanged. Not because of neglect or abandonment, but because it was never given the chance to evolve beyond its origin. No family history has layered over those limestone walls. No generational memories have softened the cold grandeur of its halls. No decades of daily living have humanized the architecture. Greystone exists today exactly as it existed in 1928, architecturally perfect and emotionally frozen. And in that frozen state, it teaches us something that few estates reveal so clearly. Extreme wealth can build permanence, extraordinary structures that will last centuries. But it cannot guarantee continuity. Cannot ensure that the people those structures are built for will be there to inhabit them. Cannot protect against the human fragility that renders even the most impressive achievements meaningless in a moment. Legacy can be planned down to the inch, every architectural detail carefully considered, every material chosen for its durability, every design decision made to ensure lasting impact. But it cannot be guaranteed. Because legacy requires people, and people are always, inevitably, vulnerable. Greystone represents the collision between these two truths. The permanence that wealth can create and the fragility it cannot eliminate. And the result is a mansion that succeeded completely at its architectural purpose while failing utterly at its human one. This isn't unique to the Doheny family. History is full of grand estates built by powerful families who believed they were establishing permanent dynasties, only to watch those dynasties end through tragedy, decline, or simple bad timing. What makes Greystone special is how clearly it demonstrates this pattern. How perfectly preserved it is. How little it has been allowed to change or evolve. Most estates that lose their families either decay into ruins or get repurposed so thoroughly that their original purpose becomes obscured. Greystone does neither. It remains exactly what it was meant to be architecturally, while serving as a permanent reminder of how quickly human purpose can evaporate. Walk through Greystone today and you're not just visiting a historic building. You're standing inside a frozen moment, the exact instant when a family's planned future ended and the monument they built to ensure that future became instead a memorial to its loss. The mansion wasn't cursed. It wasn't haunted by supernatural forces. It was simply finished at the exact moment life stopped moving forward. And that timing, that terrible, ironic timing, has defined it ever since. Some houses grow old with their families. They accumulate the wear and warmth of generations. They're shaped by the lives lived within them. They evolve from architectural statements into family homes into historic landmarks that carry the full weight of their history. Some houses watch empires rise and fall within their walls. They're witnesses to change, to success and decline, to the full arc of a family's story. And some houses, rare ones like Greystone, remain forever trapped in the moment they were completed, carrying a silence that has nothing to do with age, preserving a loss that time itself refuses to erase. Greystone Estate stands today not primarily as a monument to oil wealth or architectural achievement, though it is both of those things. It stands as a reminder of something that old money has always known but rarely acknowledges. That no amount of stone, money, or meticulous planning can ensure a future. That the most impressive mansion in America can be rendered meaningless by human tragedy. That permanence, no matter how carefully engineered, is always just a beautiful illusion. The dark secret inside Greystone isn't a mystery waiting to be solved. It's a truth that has been visible since 1929. Preserved in limestone and silence for nearly a century, this house succeeded at lasting forever. It just never got the chance to become what it was meant to be. And that failure, perfect, permanent, and utterly irreversible, is what makes Greystone one of America's most haunting estates.